Okay, so we've been looking at GDP, and you'll recall that what we talked about on Friday was kind of what we could think of GDP as, right? And so we had this idea that we said, okay, we can see that, like, say, GDP is, say, the price of apples times the amount of apples and the price of, I think it was bread, times the quantity of bread, and the price of computers times the number of computers, etc. And we even came up with some numbers. So, for example, we said, okay, look, the price of apples is, say, $1, and we have, say, 100 apples, I think, is what we had. And we said, oh, look, the price of bread is, say, $2, and bread was, I think, maybe 200 loaves. And we said the price of computers was, say, 500, and we had, say, 50 computers. And so if this was the only thing that our economy consisted of, we would say, oh, okay, well, here's what our GDP is. Our GDP is going to be, basically 100 plus 400 plus 5 times 5 is 25. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 25,500, right? Here, in essence, is the market value of all the goods and services that our economy is producing within this year. And like I said, we can see this guy changing in both a nominal sense and in a real sense, right? So when we're looking at, say, nominal GDP, we said this is essentially all today's prices and today's output. Whereas when we were looking at, say, real GDP, we said this was, in essence, today's output and some base year prices. So whatever year it is that we chose for that base year, it could be any year that we wanted it to be. The number can be anything. Any year that you have, in essence, a price index for. Right? So we also said that, in essence, like I said, we could think of GDP as this. In a more simplified fashion, what we say is that GDP is equal to all these other different components. So we had consumption, gross investment, government expenditures, and then exports and imports. All right. And so we can kind of see what a lot of this looks like. So for example, here is our GDP from, say, third quarter of 1947 all the way up until today. These shaded areas right here are recessions. Right? And we can look at this guy in a couple of different ways. We can say, here was our, let's do it, let's go this way. BEA day is better for this. Just trying to avoid using it, but it just is really better. Let's look at these different components here. So we can look at this from this standpoint, right? This is our annual stuff. Let's just go back, select all years, refresh table. And we want our chart on this. So here is, in essence, what GDP has looked like, right? Now, interestingly enough, of course, you can see that this guy is essentially straight up all the time because that's what nominal GDP does. Because sometimes, even when output's declining, you're still seeing prices increase enough to make up for that decline in output so that nominal GDP is increasing. But if we were to look at some other components, We could look at this in terms of, say, let's say real GDP. And here's what I mean by these different price indices, right? So we can look at this in terms of 1937 dollars. We can look at in 1952, 1972, 1992. You can look at whatever year that you want it to be. It can be anything. So we'll look at these different ones here, and you'll see what these numbers are and how they've changed, right? So here is our gross domestic product. These are essentially kind of basically in today's dollars, in 2009 dollars, and you can see that here. I'll modify this guy again. Let's do annual. Let's just do, say, 1970 to today, refresh table. And then here's our chart. Yes. So you can see these periods here where we're actually seeing real GDP decline, right? I mean, you got another one right here where people are actually worse off. I mean, they're actually seeing declines in real output. That's in essence what a recession is. We'll define that in a little bit more detail later on. But we have these different components here. And like I said, I mean, we can make these numbers be anything we want them to be. So here we are in 1990 or in 2009 dollars, which are not too terribly different from today dollars. We see GDP is 16,716, right? These are, of course, in trillions. So here's our real GDP. $2,009, right? As opposed to our other one that we had here, our $37. Modify, no, close. Well, they only go to 47, they stopped. Let's go to, say, let's see how far this one goes. Modify. Well, that one stops. Close. You can continue the price index for, like I said, for however long you want it to. It can be any number that you want it to be. 92 should go all the way through, at least I hope it does. If not, that's okay. Yeah, they stopped calculating it. But that's fine. It's the same thing. You can make the numbers be whatever you want them to be. So, for example, and we'll show this here, so let's close this guy. Let's do, let's go back to this. So here we are in these different years. So let's just pick a year. Here's 1945. That's the year World War I ended. So we've got 185.1 in gross domestic product in 1945. And these are in 1937 prices. Okay. So those are using the prices that existed in 1937 to figure that out. So let's look at these other components. Let's go back to this guy. And we can see here using today's prices, right? We're getting two completely different numbers. So here we see in, say, 1945 GDP and 2009 prices using today's prices, right? So an apple costing, I don't know, 47 cents, and a banana costing a quarter, and a cup of coffee costing $1 and whatever. That's how much GDP would have been in 1945, right? $2.2 trillion, not very much. 1945 GDP using the same, counting the same amounts of apples and bananas and coffee and all of that stuff, it's only 185.1, right? So that's what we mean by these differences when we're looking at nominal and real. And you can actually even look at, say, nominal GDP within that year as well if you want to. So we'll go back to this guy, which is looking at nominal GDP. Annual. And nominal GDP in 1945 was 228.2. So you can ask yourself, well, which is it? Was it 185.1? Was it 2,217.8? Or was it 228.2? And the answer is yes. It was all of those. It depends upon the metric that you're using to measure it. You want to look at nominal or do you want to look at real? If you look at real, it's important to know which year do you choose as your base prices. So let's kind of look at these different components here. And we can see, let's see here, these different amounts. So we said our GDP here was equal to consumption plus gross investment plus gross expenditures plus exports minus imports, right? So when we're looking at our guy here, so here we are looking at this guy in 2016, right? And we saw right here, remember, real 2009 GDP this year is 16.716, but if we look at it in today's prices, it's 18.6 trillion. So we can see here we've got these different components, right? And on that handout I passed out on Friday, you can see that the biggest component, you can see the same thing here, the biggest component of GDP are these personal consumption expenditures, right? So this is essentially, in this year, 12.820 trillion. Right? So consumption is just like it sounds. It's all the stuff that we're buying, us personally. Cars and coffee and apples and bananas and t-shirts and music and stuff. Then we have this other component here. We've got, in essence, gross private investment. We see this guy's about $3 trillion. So we have this guy at 3.057. Right. And then you can come down here to government. Let's do government next. And you've got 3.267 trillion down here for government. Now remember what's included in this $3.2 trillion for government expenditures. What does it include? What does it not include? You remember? What did they spend their $3.267 trillion on? That's a lot of money. Do what? Military. What else? They did not spend that on Social Security. 100,000 million billion. 100,000 million billion trillion. Spent $9,900 per person. Did you guys pay $10,000 in taxes last year? No, you didn't pay your fair share. Does not include Social Security, because Social Security is a what? It's a transfer program. They're taking money from this group and they're giving it to that group. Does not include money on welfare. Does not include money for Medicare and Medicaid. Doesn't include any of that stuff. And so you can see here they're spending $3.267 trillion. The federal government's spending $1.2 trillion. And remember, this is on goods and services. Right? Not income transfers. So when we're talking about goods and services, that's things like firefighters and fire stations, police officers, courts, roads, airports, Cowboys Stadium, et cetera, 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 right? All of those things. Pencils, papers, et cetera. Interesting enough, when you think of government spending, who do you think of? When you think of the federal government, when you think of the government spending money, who do you normally think of? Federal government or your state and local government? Federal, right? And if you look at this, and we'll look at this in more detail when we talk about taxes, but just to kind of give you a hint here. So we got $3.267.8 trillion on total government spending. $2 trillion of that comes from state and local governments. You've got $1.2 trillion coming from the federal government, but $728 billion of that was for national defense, right? Well, that's things that state and local governments don't do very well anyway, right? So this $502 billion from the federal government, it's only about 15%, right? So of all of the government spending on stuff that's not related to national defense, that the federal government spends on, it's only 15 cents. 15 cents of every dollar. Most people don't realize that. Most of the spending that happens in government happens here at the state and local level. It's Springfield and Greene County and Jeff City that's spending the money, not the federal government. They spend money, right? They spend $1.2 trillion, but most of that is this, right? I mean, if you look at their spending here, 1, 2, 3, 1, clear, 728.9 divided by 1, 2, 3, 1.5. 60% of their spending on government expenditures is national defense. That is not, though, the entire federal budget. All right, we'll look at that, like I said, later on. And then you'll see some of the problems that you have in actually cutting the federal government spending. So the federal government collects most of the tax revenues. The state and local governments actually do most of the spending. What are, now we've got net exports and services, right? So what are exports? Exports are, so exports are things that we produce here and sell to other countries, right? So made here, sold overseas. And imports are, exactly, made somewhere else, sold here. All right. So when we're looking at our exports here, we can see that our exports are $2.2 trillion, right? So we made and sold $2.2 trillion worth of stuff. But our imports are that we made, or we bought $2.735 trillion worth of stuff from other people, right? So that when we look at this on a net basis, we see that our net exports right here are -5 to 1.2, right? So when we're, like I said, when we're looking at our consumption here, we've got our C plus IG plus G plus X minus M. And oftentimes what we can do is we can simplify this even further. Just have net exports here, right? So our net exports, our XN, is just exports minus our imports. Okay. Interestingly enough, here you can see what investment kind of looks like, right? And you can see these different components here. So we've got fixed investment, non-residential, structures, equipment, intellectual property, residential, which means homes. So there's how much we spent building homes, $705.9 billion, right? So when you buy your house, when you go out and build a home, that is not considered consumption. That's actually considered investment. Why do you think we would consider that investment and not consumption?
Ideally, it appreciates.
They do depreciate, but so does the grapes in my refrigerator if I don't eat them.
They'll appreciate.
Actually, they don't. But if you look at it on a cost-adjusted basis, why would we consider them investment and not consumption?
Because you're going to be there for a while, probably. You're going to make investments in the house, like upgrades and stuff.
We consider these guys investment. Investment is just, remember, that's the stuff that we make to help us make stuff. And I missed it. We've talked about how this is the garbage can, right? Have we talked about this? I don't remember if I've talked about that in the other classes or not. Ooh, look at that. Somebody took the garbage away. This university drives me crazy, man. I'm telling you what. Today's a day that it's as good we're not on the 4th floor. That's just all I got to say. What was I talking about? Investment. So remember, investment is the stuff that we make to help us make stuff, right? And the house provides us with this flow of services over time, right? It provides us with this flow of housing services over long periods of time. I mean, homes can be there for how long? How long can a home last for? Yeah, hundreds of years, right? I mean, if you go to Europe and parts of Asia and Japan, you've got houses that have been there for hundreds of years. Homes can last a long time. So we consider these guys investment. Interestingly enough, you've got things like, say, a car. If I purchased a car, would that be consumption or investment? Exactly. What happens if IBM buys the car? They buy the car so that their salesman can go around and fix copiers and stuff like that. That's investment. It's providing a flow of services, right? So it's not necessarily true that every single thing that is purchased is always going to be consumption or it's always going to be investment, etc. Right? Now, let's look at this investment idea a little bit more detail, because we have some, let's see here, where is it? Because these assets that we do purchase have a tendency to depreciate. I'm not finding it here. Let's go to the Fred data. Let's do net domestic product. not what I wanted. This will work. Remember, we had real GDP here at 18 trillion-ish dollars. Are these real dollars or are these nominal? These are billions of dollars, not seasonally adjusted annually, right? So we've got something here called net domestic product. Let's just write some of these numbers down. So we've got our net domestic product here at 15.707 trillion. When we were to look at, say, gross, those are $2,009. I don't want that. Let's try this. Seasonally adjusted. Let's do yearly. It's annual. Let's get this guy to annual. Head graph. Annual. Close. So here we have our 2016 observation, 15.707. All right, this is for net domestic product. Here, over here, we've got our 2016 observation, 18.624 for gross domestic product. Right, we said that this guy is 18.624 trillion. What do you think is the difference between these guys? Because those are two completely different numbers. They're different by about, what, 2.9 trillion? That's a lot of money. All right, $2.9 trillion. What is that per person? 100,000 million billion. $8. Not a whole lot. Did I do that right? That doesn't seem right. 2, 9. 100,000 million billion trillion divided by 330, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. I knew it was too low. $8,800 per person. That's a lot of money. What's the difference between these two guys? What do you think? Gross domestic product, GDP, net domestic product. What do you think is what do you think is the difference between these two guys? All right, clearly there's something here, right? $2.9 trillion. The answer is on the board.
When you take out all of the consumption and all of that kind of stuff.
It's not consumption, but at least she's trying. It's the investment part, right? Notice here that we all have always said gross investment. There's no gross government expenditures, there's no gross exports, there's no gross imports, there's no gross consumption. But we always use the term gross investment when we're talking about GDP, because GDP looks at investment from a gross standpoint. What do you think NDP, net domestic product, is looking at? Not gross investment, but If gross domestic product's looking at gross includes gross investment, net domestic product is net investment, all right? Bless you. So what do you think net investment is? What does that mean?
Like everything like leading up to 2016 that we stopped investing.
No, but at least he's trying. No, but at least she's trying. What happens to factories and buildings and cars and, I mean, how many, whether it's me driving the car or it's IBM driving the car, eventually what's the car going to do? It's going to depreciate. It's going to get used up, right? If that car can only travel, let's assume I paid $20,000 for the car. And the car will travel 200,000 miles before it's done, right? So in essence, it's like I've paid $20,000 to be able to drive 200,000 miles, right? Every single time I drive that car a mile, it's costing me 10 cents. Every single mile I drive, I've used up 10 cents of that car. It's depreciating. And that's exactly what net investment looks at here, right? Gross investment includes our net investment plus our depreciation, the amount of capital that in essence we used up. So here's our net investment plus our depreciation. All right. Or you can look at it like this, right? Net domestic product is GDP minus depreciation. So of this $3.057 trillion that we had in gross investment, right? Some of that was basically just the capital that we had already used up, right? It's depreciating. So let's see, this one actually might be better for that. Can we search? We actually call it the capital consumption allowance. I don't want the glossary, I want the data. Let's see what that gives us. That's not what I want. Let's come back to this guy. That's not what I want. I want this. No, thank you. Let's see if I can find it on here. Can you tell how important this metric is? All of these tables right here are variations of some amount of GDP, right? Real gross domestic product and quantity indexes, price indices, GDP itself, real GDP and these different prices, preceding changing from the different periods, percent change from a year ago, blah, 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 right? Let's see here. I'm constantly moving things around. Let's do it's income. And that's not what I want. Let's see what this gives us. Remember how I said there was two different ways to calculate GDP? Basically, this is the other way, right? Compensation of employees and wages and salaries, proprietors' income, rental income, corporate profits, plus net interest, minus taxes on production, minus subsidies, minus these business current transfer payments. You see why I don't make you learn all that stuff? I make you just learn the C plus I plus G. It's just easier. It's the same data. Let's see what this one gives us. That's not it. No, that's not it. That's not it. Ooh, let's try this. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Yeah, is this it? Oh, it's closer. Let's see. Where did you go to? They moved you. Why would they move you? Is this it? That's not it. That's not it. Oh, you guys. Let's see if this gives us it to us. Durables. No, that's not it either. Somewhere on here they've got a table with GDP minus depreciation gives you net domestic product, minus such and such gives you thus and so, minus thus and so gives you this and that, minus thus and so gives you this and that. And I can't seem to find it. They moved the tables around on me. So we'll just pick that up on Wednesday.